Hey there, it's Lara here with your weekly Witchy Wednesday astrology forecast, and this one's for the week of February 5th to the 11th, 2020. Thanks for being here. If you resonate with what I'm saying here, then I would love to know that by you leaving me a comment or liking the video or subscribing to my channel, hopefully all of those. It does help spread the word, and I do appreciate it. So thank you. We're going to talk about the full moon in Leo today that's happening this coming weekend. And there's some conversations happening between the full moon and some other planets that we'll touch on, and a couple of other things that I want to mention to you. Before we get there, we'll start with where the moon is at currently, which is in Cancer, moving into Cancer today as I'm recording this, and moving out of Gemini, where it's been the last couple of days. It has been interesting. I've noticed in some online forums and a couple conversations I've had with people that they've been feeling a little irritated to say the least, the last couple of days, and a bit kind of maybe flighty and scattered and that kind of thing. And the moon in Gemini can have that effect depending on what it's doing in your own chart and really how you relate to that energy in general. It's, every month when the moon moves through Gemini, it's not necessarily making the same conversations that it was having the previous month or the month before that, right? The conversations change between the moon and the other planets. And so, a moon in Gemini one month can feel different than the moon in Gemini the next month, but it always has that quality or that flavor of being about the mind, curiosity, socializing. It can feel, it can be a chatty time, a time where you are focusing on communications and information gathering and sharing and this kind of thing. But, if you're not somebody who's comfortable, if that's not your comfort zone, moon in Gemini energy, then, those couple of days that the moon's in Gemini every month, you can maybe, feel a little bit like the hamster in the head is, spinning the wheel nonstop kind of thing. It's felt a little bit like that for me. I have learned, in working with the moon to get a sense of how I respond to that and how I should best utilize that energy. Because I am a Virgo rising. Mercury is my ruling planet. I have that tendency to be all up in my head to begin with. And so what I did the last couple days with the moon in Gemini was I did a lot of reading and research and that kind of thing. So that was good use of the energy. But it's good to know how you respond on the day to day. And the way to do that is to pay attention to the moon and the cycle, the phase that she's in, and the sign that she's moving through. And if you want to learn a little bit more about that and how to do that, you want to have a jumping off point for starting that process for yourself, then please go to my website and download the free guide that's there, the Guide to Working with the Moon. Just a short 10-minute audio and a 1-page PDF that'll get you started. And the link is below, and you can go do that if you haven't done it already. And if it's something that interests you. So moon passing out of Gemini into Cancer today, and then on Friday she moves into Leo, and we will have that full moon in Leo on the weekend. And then Sunday she moves into Virgo, and then Tuesday into Libra. But circling back to the full moon that's happening on February 9th at 2:33 a.m., and that's Eastern time. That's my time zone. So if you're on the West Coast, this is actually happening for you on the 8th, right? But sort of late at night. But for us here in Eastern time zone, it's 2:33 a.m. February 9th. So you can adjust according to your time zone. And it is happening at 20 degrees of Leo, which is a fixed fire sign. And we're going to dive into that full moon in more detail very shortly. But I want to mention to you that Mercury is now in Pisces. I touched briefly on this in last week's video. And speaking of last week's video, before I talk more on Mercury and Pisces, I missed Cancer in last week's video. So I do apologize for that. I didn't even realize that happened until somebody pointed it out to me. And this is what's going on with me these days, because Neptune is, Neptune's moving through the sky, currently at 17 degrees of Pisces, which is sitting directly on my natal sun, where the sun was when I was born. This is an interesting transit, and it's long because Neptune moves very, very slowly. And it retrogrades. And so it's this back and forth dance. And last week it was squaring Mars. And so that was particularly tricky. Even today, like this is the third take of this video. It is an interesting transit, an interesting energy, but the energy, my own personal, energy really ebbs and flows. I'm finding under this influence, and it is sometimes difficult to stay focused and kind of in the present. And it's hard sometimes to articulate, I find, what's going on in here. Neptune is hard to pin down. It's ethereal. It's this kind of dreamy, spacey energy in a lot of ways, very spiritual. And so it doesn't always lend so well to the daily activities. So I just wanted to interject there and say, sorry that happened. I'll endeavor for that not to happen again, but I'll try not to, but I can't make any promises under this transit. So, and speaking of Neptune, ruler of Pisces, Mercury is in Pisces, right? And that started on the 3rd. So Mercury doesn't love being in Pisces because Pisces has that energy of being more kind of in the fantasy realms and more, Mercury likes this precision and likes things defined and likes things concrete, and this sort of, it's like, whereas in Pisces, it's hard to pin down. It's hard to get a straight answer. It's hard to get a clear picture. It's hard for the words to come. Communications happen in more sort of silent ways sometimes, even. The messages, it's a good time. It's a good energy for receiving messages in ways that are not necessarily what we would think of as traditional. And messages sort of, and communications in those sort of unseen ways. Also, Mercury in Pisces is good for creativity. It sees and communicates things in pictures and words, or not words, pictures and symbols and music and poetry and this kind of thing, right? So, it may not be the best energy for doing spreadsheets, let's say. If you have to do that, take extra time and attention and breaks. Maybe play some music in the background, that kind of thing. So that's Mercury in Pisces. Mercury's going to retrograde. We'll get to that when it happens. It's happening on the 16th. We are in the shadow phase right now. But, I'm going to save that for another video. Then we have Venus moving into Aries this week. And that's happening on the 7th. So right before a couple days before the full moon, it will be there until March 4th. Mercury is moving out of, Neptune, I'm telling you. Venus is moving out of Pisces, where she does quite like to be, and into Aries, where she's less comfortable, because Venus is more, considered a softer, more feminine, receptive energy, where Mars is a more masculine, yang, active energy, right? And so they are not necessarily of the same, mind. But I will say this. I have natal Venus in Aries. So I'm familiar with this energy, and I can tell you what it is good for and an empowering way to use it. Because, I'm familiar with both sides. And I would say that it's really good for pursuing our desires, for being assertive, for going after what we want, for focusing on self-love as well, because Aries is about I, me, I am, right? And Chiron is in Aries right now too, helping us to sort of heal our wounds around our identity and who we are. And so with Venus there in Aries, it's a good way to harness that energy, right? To focus on the self-love piece for a while, and also to really kind of, be that brave female warrior energy. Like it's like the Amazon, kind of the Wonder Woman energy in a sense, is Venus in Aries. And so that's a good way to use this energy. And now let's talk more about the full moon. I'm going to show you the chart real quick here before I get into more of the full moon details. So here's the chart for the full moon on the 9th of February. There's the moon at 20 degrees of Leo. Opposite the sky is the sun in Aquarius at 20 degrees. So full moon is always when the sun and the moon are opposite each other in the sky, right? That's a full moon. The moon is fully reflecting the light of the sun at this time. And so we have a full moon. And then in relation to this full moon specifically, we have asteroid Vesta there, who is in this sort of more tense conversation to the full moon in a square. I'll speak to that. But we have Mars in Sagittarius, another fire sign, in a supportive conversation with this full moon called a trine. So I'll speak to that as well. And then we have Neptune, of course, having a conversation with this full moon that can be a little bit of a fly in the ointment, right? It's called an inconjunct, and I'll speak to that as well. Of course, we have the saga continues in Capricorn up here. I'm not going to go into those details right now. We've talked about Capricorn tons, but just be mindful that is still going on. And then Ceres has moved out of their asteroid Ceres into Aquarius now. And we've got Mercury in Pisces, as I mentioned to you. And then there's the Aries energy here I spoke about Lilith last week, moving into Aries. And there's Venus, as I mentioned, and Chiron, right? Very close together, and Eris as well. So that's what's going on at the time of this full moon. So again, full moons, sun and the moon opposite the sky, the divine masculine and the divine feminine. This more, when we're talking about the moon, this more feminine, receptive, yang energy, the energy of like what's kind of under the surface in the unconscious, the emotional, the instinctual, this kind of thing. Versus the moon, the more masculine, assertive, energy, that what's sort of in the obvious, in the consciousness, right? And so those two energies face off at the time of a full moon, and it may bring to light where these energies are out of balance in some way, and we need to address that. It can often bring about, relationship themes can come up around the time of a full moon as well. So, but a full moon, aside from those things, is this time of the month where things they reach a precipice, they reach a boiling point, they reach a culmination. Something comes to fruition. We see the fruits of our labors. Something comes up that needs to be released, moved through, let go of. All of those themes at the full moon. The moon pulls on our emotions, right? And causes them to come to the surface. And so full moons can be emotional times, but there's a purpose to that. These emotions that we may have been, ignoring or bearing down or not not acknowledging, come to the surface to make us aware of certain things and of what we may not have been paying attention to, or what's not working for us and what needs to be adjusted, and those kinds of things as well. So whatever seeds we planted at the new moon, right? In this case, the last new moon was in Aquarius. Now we start to see the, where that's leading us and what's coming to pass as a result of what we planted. And sometimes we find that, sometimes we find we get to the next level. It's a leveling up. Or there's some kind of crisis that we need to work through, and we realize maybe this isn't going to work like I thought. Things need to be adjusted, or something is illuminated there. And this can be related to the previous new moon that happened in that sign as well. So in this case, Leo, the new moon in Leo 6 months ago, right, in August. So if something began then, this can be a time of reaching a culmination point or a release point as well. And then we've got let's talk about Leo and Aquarius for a minute here, and those two energies, right? Moon in Leo, Sun in Aquarius. So Leo is really our heart's desires. It is what comes from the heart, what speaks to our heart, what sparks joy for us. It's our creative expression as individuals. Anything we create, children, what brings us pleasure. It's this energy of joy and childlike wonder and creativity and being in the limelight and generosity and enthusiasm and courage and benevolent leadership at its best. And then on the shadow side, if we're operating sort of on the shadow side of Leo, that can look like childishness and narcissism, and really stirring up drama or being overly dramatic, or it can look like wanting to be the boss of everyone and everything, and drawing our attention, drawing all the attention to ourselves and this kind of thing. I think about like a kid who's having a temper tantrum, right? Like arms crossed and pouting, or maybe like screaming red-faced and stomping, that kind of thing. That's the shadow side of Leo, to put it simply. So we've got that Leo energy, which is the focus of the full moon, and then it's sitting across the sky from Aquarius, whereas Leo's about the heart, Aquarius is very cerebral. It's about the head, right? The intellect. And whereas Leo's about the individual, Aquarius is about the group. Whereas Leo's about the sort of what sparks joy in the moment, what brings me pleasure in the here and now, what I create in the here and now in myself, versus the future vision and my hopes and dreams for the future. So those two things are in this dance, at the time of this full moon, that may require some balance. And so it may be that we're craving more time to focus on what brings us joy. If we've been spending all our time doing things that don't bring us any joy, it's time to change that, right? It's time to, the full moon will draw our attention to that. Just as the full moon will draw our attention, if we have been, operating on that shadow side of Leo, where we've been overly self-focused or prideful or dramatic or attention-seeking or, hedonistic, these kinds of things. The full moon will draw our attention to that and the need for balancing as well, right? So the conversations happening in relation to this full moon that I mentioned, I'll break those down now before we go into each sign. The first one is a T-squared to Vesta. So Vesta in Vesta is sitting in, where is Vesta sitting? Oh my gosh, see, Neptune. I'm just blaming everything on Neptune now. Vesta is sitting in Taurus, right, an earth sign, at 17 degrees. And so Vesta is squaring this full moon. and in this conversation of tension, in this conversation of can't go any further, have to turn a corner one way or the other, have to take some action to resolve the tension, so the tension doesn't kind of implode, right? That's a square. And Vesta in mythology is the goddess of the hearth, tasked with keeping the sort of home fires burning, the sacred keeper of the sacred flame. And she, I think, this goddess energy of Vesta, which is known in other traditions as, Hestia in Greek, and there is Brigid is this quality, same quality in Celtic mythology, and Ceridwen in Welsh mythology. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. But same kind of energy. And so I don't think she gets the credit she deserves. And why is that? Because, well, if you think about it, keeping the home fires burning, right, is a pretty important job. Back in the day, people relied on that. They relied on the hearth. The hearth was the heart of the home. And so, they relied on it for comfort, for light, for heating, for cooking. All of these things are essential, really, to life in many ways, at least to living a life that is more comfortable. And so if we don't pay attention to that and that flame goes out, then that's not good for any of us. So I think she's drawing our attention to the importance of that, and also to the importance of focusing on sort of that internal flame, right? That's always there. Sometimes it's hard to tune into it, but if we let that internal flame, right, the light, our internal light, go out, well, not good. So I think she's there to draw our attention to the importance of that at this time. And, to the fact that there may be something we need to shift, and particularly in terms of our relationship to what or who we are in service to. And if there is too much of that going on or not enough of it going on. And also, like I said, following the guidance of our internal flame, right, of our heart, will lead us in the right direction. So there's that piece, and then there's the conversation that Mars is having with this full moon, which is a supportive conversation. Mars is sitting in a fellow fire sign of Sagittarius, and so lending support in the form of the will, Mars, the will to act, right, to take action on something, and the energy to sort of push forward and go after what we want, and to take charge, and to assert ourselves. Now I just want to caution, with a trine, we don't run the risk so much of this, but it's possible that that Mars energy comes out in ways that are like impulsive, not in a good way, like foolish risk taking, dangerous risk taking, being aggressive, running your mouth off when you should have kept it zipped, or that kind of thing, right? You know what I mean? So, but this, it's a supportive energy. So it's helping us take some action, towards this, whatever's going on at the full moon for us. And I mentioned Venus in Aries, right? Also in a fire sign. So again, fanning the flames of that full moon as well. And really helping us kind of go after what we want. So the last thing is, we got good old Neptune there sitting in Pisces, as I mentioned, and Neptune is in this conversation with the full moon that can feel a bit uncomfortable and irritating, and like an itch you can't scratch sort of thing. It's called an inconjunct or a quincunx. Those two things mean the same. It's a 150-degree angle conversation. And what happens when the planets are having this kind of a conversation, it's that it's two energies that they can't agree. They can't see each other's point of view. They don't understand each other. And so, they're not on the same page. And so this really requires, that can feel irritating, right? It requires some patience. It requires compromise. It requires oftentimes some creative and innovative solutions. Creative, Leo, innovative, Aquarius solutions. So, that's everything that's going on in relation to this full moon. And now I'm going to run through each of the 12 signs and speak to where this full moon is happening for you. So what house it's happening in, and where that sort of opposite energy is, right? Where that sort of, so that need for balancing that I was talking about in the introduction. And I just, I'll say that we look, when we're doing these general forecasts, first and foremost at rising sign, because in a general forecast, it's the most sort of in your face, if you will. It's the most obvious. You do need a birth time to know your rising sign, also called the ascendant. And if you don't have that, that's okay. Some people don't. But you can still listen to your sun sign and moon sign. And I encourage you to listen to all three if you know all three, right? If you have time for that, because it kind of gives you a fuller picture. It never gives you the picture that, when you have a personal birth chart done, that speaks to you as an individual. When I do these forecasts, or anybody else you're listening to, or horoscopes that you read, I'm speaking to everybody who has a Virgo rising, for example. Or, everybody who has a Leo sun, that kind of thing. So that's how that works. Okay, so let's begin with Leo. Leo, this is your full moon. So the light's on you, right? Shining the light on you. And we know, Leo, you like to be in the spotlight. And that's awesome. That's what you're made for. It is, you set that example and give the rest of us permission to do the same. And so for you, Leo, this is really, this full moon is illuminating that sense of I am. And, this encompasses your physical vitality and your physical body and appearance, but it's also about how you instinctually approach the world and how the world perceives you as well, right? So full moon is lighting up that area of the chart for you. Something's coming to fruition. Something's bubbling up from the surface. Something is culminating, coming up for release. All those things we talked about in the introduction, right? And that is in contrast, shall we say, to what's going on with the sun. The sun is opposite the chart. So the sun is sitting in your 7th house, moon is sitting in your 1st house. This is the axis of relationship. So around the time of this full moon, relationships in your life may pull focus for you. The relationship between me and you, the other and the I kind of thing, may come into play here. But ultimately, something reaching this illuminated place, right, in your life, in terms of the 1st house. So that's for you, Leo. And moving on to Cancer now. I'm so sorry that I missed you last week, Cancer. I hope your feelings are not hurt. I really do apologize for that. It was just a gap, a Neptunian transit gap. So for you, though, this full moon is happening in your 2nd house. And so that is putting the focus on your personal resources, your time, your money, your energy, your material possessions, your sense of how you use your gifts and talents and skills to make money, that kind of thing. It has to do with your values, what you put value on, and how you value yourself, so your self-worth as well. So that's the area that's being lit up for you, Cancer. And so something coming to pass there, something coming to fruition, to culmination, something wanting to be released, right? All those things, those terms we use in relation to a full moon. And that opposite the sky then sits the sun in your 8th house of other people's resources, other people's time, money, energy. And those intimate sort of connections, right? and the areas where you are vulnerable, where you feel vulnerable. So deep psychological healing and wounding, falls into that category. But there can be this tension between what's going on in the second house and what's going on in the eighth house, and a need to bring those things into balance in some way for you over the time of this full moon, Cancer. So, and that's, what I just said to you is, you put those things sort of under the umbrella of what I've already said in the introduction. Moving on to Taurus now. Taurus, the full moon is illuminating your fourth house. And that is the house that speaks to things revolving around the home, the family, the place of living, like your literal place of living, your dwelling, your sense of emotional safety and security and comfort. And this can also have to do with like our ancestrals, particularly the matrilineal line, or just, the nurturing female energies in your life, including the mother. Excuse me. But so for you, this area of the chart's being lit up under this Leo full moon, something coming to pass there, something reaching a precipice, culmination, fruition, needing to be released, all of that full moon stuff, right? In relation to what's going on in the 10th house. Sun is in the 10th house for you. So it's the opposition there, that tension, that need for balance, right? Between home, 4th house, and public life, public persona, the public legacy you wish to leave, your career, your status, your relationship to the more sort of patriarchal figures in your life, or your authority figures, your own authority, that sort of thing is 10th house. So those two energies are in a bit of, seesaw kind of thing. And there needs to be like, you can address at this time, what's out of balance here and how can I restore some balance between these two things? But ultimately the full moon is lighting up that 4th house. So that's for you, Taurus. Moving on to Aries, the full moon is illuminating your 5th house, Aries, which is home to Leo. So that speaks to those themes of your individual creative expression and how you shine your light, right? And it has to do with what sparks joy for you, what brings you pleasure, what makes you happy, what makes you feel like a kid again. It has to do with children, your own children or children you're associated with. So that area is being lit up for you. Something's coming to pass, coming to culmination, fruition, needing to be released or let go of, an ending in some way. All of those full moon things, right? And that's in relation to the sun sitting in the 11th house across the sky, which is the house of the group versus the individual, right? Which is the 5th house. So the group, so any kind of group associations you can think of, including friendships, including clubs, associations, including networks, including online, networks and that kind of thing as well. It's also speaks to your future aspirations and hopes and dreams as well. And so those two things, right? The 5th house and the 11th house are, there's something going on there that may require some balancing act of some description, or bringing back into balance in some way. So that's for you, Aries. We're going to move on to Pisces now. So Pisces, you have the full moon illuminating your 6th house. Your 6th house is all those things you do on the day-to-day, those little tasks, paid and unpaid, those, checking off the list kind of activities that get done on the day-to-day. This includes routines around your health and wellness, right? Or if you work in the health and wellness field, this can be 6th house as well. It has to do with pets. It has to do with how we are in service as well, and relationships between sort of people that aren't necessarily on an equal playing field. So employer and employee, teacher and student, that kind of thing. So that's being illuminated for you. Something's going on in that area of the chart that's being lit up, that's coming to pass, that's coming to fruition, culmination, needing to be released. And then, this is in relation to what's going on in the opposite part of the chart for you, which is the sun in the 12th house of the unseen and what goes on behind closed doors and your spiritual life and how you spend time in rest and contemplation and isolation and recovery and rehabilitation. It is about oftentimes your spiritual and mental health. It's about self-sabotaging behaviors. The 12th house can speak to those transitions in life too. And sometimes places of transition, right, are things like hospitals and hospices and rehabilitation facilities and spiritual retreat centers and prisons and all of these things. So there is something going on, something at play between those two life areas that requires some need for balancing those, restoring balance in those areas. But ultimately, that what's really being illuminated for you is the 6th house that I spoke about. All right, moving on to Aquarius now. Aquarius, obviously the sun is in your sign. But the moon is in the opposite sign, right? This full moon is in the opposite sign of Leo, which is in your 7th house of one-to-one relationship. And also contracts falls into this 7th house area. So for you, Aquarius, the moon is lighting up relationships in your chart. It's lighting up that house of the other, right? So it can be close friends. It can be a significant other, a marriage partner, a business partner, a rival, anything like that. And so something's coming to pass there, coming to culmination, fruition, release, letting go, all of this that I spoke about in the introduction. And then in relation to what's going on with you in the 1st house of the self, of I am, of your approach to the world and how the world perceives you, of your physical body and appearance and vitality. So there's something going on there that requires a balancing act around this time, or requires you to bring things back into balance on that axis. So that's for you, Aquarius. And we're going to move to Capricorn now, where the full moon is illuminating your 8th house, Capricorn, of other people's resources, other people's time and energy and money. And also this notion of transformation, right? And digging deep and things buried in the psyche, psychological healing and wounding and vulnerability, right? Those intimate, like all those intimate things. And so for you, Capricorn, this is being illuminated. Something in this house life area is coming to pass, being lit up, needing to be released, coming to culmination or fruition. And there is a play going on between that and opposite the sky, the sun in your 2nd house of your personal resources, your personal time, money, and energy, your personal values and your self-worth. And so there may be a requirement of bringing things back into balance along that axis of the sort of material physical form and transformation of your resources, other people's resources, kind of thing. But it's the 8th house that the moon is illuminating for you. So that's what's going on for you, Capricorn. And we'll move to Sagittarius now, where we've got the full moon illuminating your 9th house, Sag, which is your home, right? 9th house. Sagittarius is at home in the 9th house. So for you, the full moon's illuminating this area of the chart that speaks to your big picture vision, your worldview, your philosophy, your belief system, it also speaks to things that are sort of far away, far away adventures, people and places and ideas and things, that come from people and places that are different from us. And also this notion of higher learning fits into the 9th house, right? So that can be literally like kind of college, university, or any kind of higher learning beyond the basics that's going on. Teaching, learning, publishing can come into 9th house, lots of things. But this big picture energy. And so the full moon is illuminating that area, right? Something's coming to fruition, coming up to be released, coming up to culmination, to reaching a precipice in some way. And then that's across the sky from the sun in your third house of the immediate environment, and sort of like the people and interactions that happen in the immediate environment, and the short commutes, and the information, the messages exchanged back and forth. Also teaching and learning, but more on like the basics level, early learning, right? Or the beginner stuff kind of thing. And so these things are kind of, in this dance, these two areas of the chart requiring your attention to bring those back into balance in some way. But moon illuminating the 9th house. Then we've got Scorpio next, where the full moon is illuminating your 10th house, a very public place in the chart, right? Illuminating this, your public reputation and persona and status, and your worldly ambitions and your career and the legacy you wish to leave, and your authority and relationship to authority, and the more sort of patriarchal kind of figures in your life as well. And so for you, Scorpio, the full moon, something coming to pass, something wanting to be released, resolved, something reaching a precipice, something coming to fruition or culmination. And then opposite the sky is the sun in the 4th house of home, family, place of living. The sort of more female nurturing figures in your life, your emotional security. And so family, this kind of thing. So those two areas are kind of like, vying for attention right now, and maybe requiring you to take some action to bring those things back into balance in some way. But ultimately, full moon lighting up your 10th house. Moving on to Libra. Libra, the full moon is illuminating your 11th house of the group, of friendship groups or clubs or associations or organizations, or networking, even internet falls into this category. It's also about your future vision and your hopes and dreams for the future, whereas opposite the sky is the 5th house, which is that house where Leo is at home in, and that's about your individual creativity and what brings you joy. And sort of the more sort of immediate, like in the moment rather than the future. And so the individual versus the group is the thing that's going on here between you, or for you at the time of this full moon, Libra, that's requiring, maybe a bit of a balancing act. But ultimately, the full moon's illuminating your 11th house. So that's what's happening for you. And then last but not least, we have Virgo. So Virgo, for you, the full moon is illuminating this part of the chart, the 12th house, that is all about what, what's under the surface, what goes on behind closed doors, the unseen, how you spend time in quiet, solitude, isolation, contemplation, rest, recuperation, recovery. It's your spiritual life. It has to do with these transition places as well, right? So like, because it's the 12th house, the very end of the zodiac, so it can have to do with transitioning from one thing to the other. It can have to do with literally places of transition. So I've said before, things like spiritual retreat centers or hospitals or hospices or long-term care facilities, prisons, rehabilitation facilities, all of these kinds of things. So, and it speaks to your mental and spiritual health as well, the 12th house. Virgo. So that's where the full moon's illuminating for you. And then across the sky is the sun in your 6th house of the daily grind, right? And your daily routines and the things you do on the day to day and all the ticky boxes that need to be checked off. And your more sort of like physical health, mental health too, to a degree. It's sort of that kind of runs across the axis. I see it as that, but the more sort of practical things that you do, that are health related and those just the tasks you do on the day to day. And so your daily grind may be a little bit in conflict with your need for solitude right now, for example. And so, you have to work to bring those things back into balance. This may be really illuminated for you at the time of this full moon. So, that's that's everybody. That's all 12 signs. I don't think I missed anybody this week. I hope not. So thank you for being here. Thank you for spending this time with me. And full moon, blessings to you. Shine, shine on in true Leo fashion. And I will speak to you next week. Okay, take care. Bye-bye.